The next panel discussion is on interpreting the GEEAP report and its implication on Indian context. The panelists will be looking at the recommendations of GEEAP report, the current context of education in India, and also what it has in terms of the perspectives, what India needs to do to ensure foundational as well as numeracy in terms of every child in next few years. May I now it's a privilege to invite Rukmini Banerjee, CEO, Pratham Education, who's the chair of the panel discussion, to the stage, please. And she'll be followed by Sourav Banerjee, Country Director, Room to Read, Amit Kaushik, CEO, ACER, and Yamini Aiyar, President and CEO, Center for Policy Research.
Thank you very much to British Council for inviting us. British Council from my childhood was a place which was very popular in summer. At least in my hometown, Patna, they had a small library which used to be full from April till about October because it was one of the only public places which had air conditioning. But it's very nice that as an adult, I am able to participate in things which are of greater importance. I'm really happy to have the panel that I have, people who are very well known in the field and also good friends. And so our challenge today is to keep the conversation very lively. Amit had promised to join this only up to a certain time because he has another meeting. And so we'll see how long we are able to capture and keep Amit here while our chat is going on. Now, each of my panelists are very well known in a particular part of education with a lot of deep expertise in different domains. But they've all been players on the Indian education scene for quite a long time. And so I'm sure for the last hour and a half, they've had many thoughts that they would like to bring out. I want to point out, Rachel, that this is one of the verticals that you don't have on your slide. You had researchers, you had donors, and I think you had government. But all of us here are some other vertical, which are people who have been working on the ground for a long time, but also appreciate and often create evidence and data. So the slide needs to be perhaps redone and put one more, whatever, bucket or panel or something. So what I thought I would do is that there is a report. The report has been recommending both the reports, in fact, not just the one about COVID and learning, but the first report also came out pretty much after the pandemic had started. So there are recommendations from the report which have wide-ranging implications. But we also, at the same time in India, had the new education policy. So I think a combination of coming out, hopefully coming out of the last 2 years, and the umbrella of the new education policy, I think provides a very fertile context in India to think about what are we doing in terms of building, rebuilding, strengthening, foundational literacy and numeracy. And I also worry a lot that we are only these days talking about foundations, but there are children through our education system. So hopefully we can get a chance to talk about that as well. So I thought what we do is do one round. We should always start with the positive things, things that you feel we are at this present time, given the opportunity of what the new education policy is offering, the possibilities, and the fact that we are just coming out of COVID. And obviously at the back of our minds, we have some of the recommendations that have been made by this report. Can we, from your own experience, from the places where you are working, think or mention a couple of things that you think actually are happening better than expected? We can go in any order, but since, Banerjee should hang together, I'll give it to him first.
I will certainly hang separately.
Great. Thank you, Rukmini, and thanks to the organizers for giving us this opportunity to talk about this issue. It's something that's very close to our heart, to my heart, as an organization that works in the field of foundational literacy and numeracy, and I'll probably stick to foundational literacy and numeracy and ask others to tackle the other areas of education. I think to kind of respond to Rukmini's questions, and we just heard the Joint Secretary speak so much about the kind of work that the government has been doing post-COVID, and the plethora of initiatives that the government has, almost implemented. So basically, there are two things that you're talking about. One is the GEEAP report, the whole learning loss, the whole learning recovery that goes along with it. And then also the NAP and the Nipun and this focus on foundational literacy. And what's happening is, it's probably now well known to everyone here, that foundational literacy and numeracy was a challenge in our country even before COVID. So even before COVID, children were not learning at the levels they were ought to be learning. And we were struggling to even bring it as an advocacy agenda item, that why is foundational literacy and numeracy important. The NAP largely has addressed that. It has addressed the why of it. It has said why it's important. The government has followed after that to define almost the what of foundational literacy through the Nipun document, which very eloquently and very clearly lays out the comprehensive nature of looking at foundational literacy and numeracy. It's not just curricular reform, it's a holistic reform. You have to look at governance, you have to look at administration areas, assessments, teacher capacity building and all of that. So I think there's been a huge work on that side. The whys of foundational literacy and numeracy has been established, the what has been laid out. It's almost, we are now, I think, designing, states are in a position where they're designing the house of it. And I think many states are, some states are doing great work, some states are a bit slow on that, which is natural in a country like India. So I think there's a lot that's happening on that side. On the COVID recovery, on the learning recovery side, again, the Joint Secretary has already mentioned, the earlier speakers have also mentioned about the fact that learning loss is something that, again, something we have acknowledged, the government has acknowledged, various state governments have acknowledged the fact. The level of acknowledgement might vary across various education levels, but there is a larger acknowledgement of the fact that there has been a learning loss. There has been initiatives which states have done, which central government has done, both digital as well as physical. We heard about worksheets being distributed. We heard about how children has been reached out through various means. We also know of various technological efforts that has been made to reach out to children. Yet we all also know that in spite of all of this effort, there has been a huge digital divide. And we find in the, at least organizations like us who work in the ground, do see a lot of children who have been further marginalized due to the digital divide and now are worse off than they were even pre-COVID. So there's definitely a challenge, and I think governments are aware of that. They are working towards it. The good part is they're seeking help from non-state, non-government actors, organizations to help them do that. So these are, again, I think, all very positive things that's happening across the ecosystem. I'll pause here and hand it over to Amit maybe, and we'll come down to other things later.
Amit, just to add my own 2 bits, that perhaps if we look at recent documents and do a search and count for the word assessment, I have a feeling that the word comes up many more times now than it perhaps did some years ago. And since you are squarely in that field, tell us what you think about what is going right in terms of assessment in this current context.
Well, before I get to what's going right in specifically assessment, let me pick up where Sourav left and also maybe address the initial question that you asked. I think there's 3 things that I would flag that that have gone well in this pandemic, post-pandemic period. The first is there is a very strong enabling environment that the government has created. And that's whether that's through the NEP or it's through the subsidiary policy decisions that have been taken. I think that's a very important factor, one that we often sometimes miss. The fact is that the government has paid a great deal of attention to the various different aspects of education, whether that is digital content or it is assessment, etc., etc. But the point is that there has been a great deal of attention paid to these areas, and that's led to a situation where you have, at least from a policy perspective, you have a framework that can be very enabling, provided it is translated into action on the ground in the actual implementation sense. So that's one. The second thing I would say is that most schools, whether it's in the private sector or it's in the government sector, have taken a step back when kids have come back to school. And they have allowed for the time to not just talk about assessment of learning, but also an assessment of socio-emotional state. Understanding where the child is, appreciating the fact that the last 2 years have been extremely difficult, and giving children the sense of this being a safe space and you're welcome back here, and trying to figure out where kids stand from that perspective. The third and most important thing that I'd flag that I think has happened well after the pandemic is the fact that schools have reopened. I mean, that to me is actually one of the biggest steps. India has, I think it was Uganda, that had the record for the longest school closures post-pandemic. But I think we beat that. We beat that. And at least in the initial phases of the pandemic, I think our response to the situation and the way in which we handled the whole business of whether school should open, not open, children should come, should not come, was a bit knee-jerk. And the result of that has been that the learning loss issue that we are currently talking about, that we see today, already existed. I mean, Pratham has pointed out year after year what learning levels are like in real terms. I think that problem already existed. We made it far worse. So the third, and actually I should probably have put that the first and most important thing that really has happened post-pandemic is the fact that the schools have reopened. And I hope, for God's sake, whatever comes after this, 4th wave, 5th wave, 7th wave, we don't go back to a situation where schools are shut immediately without thinking twice about it. Because the world over, we've established the fact that you don't really need to do this. Assessment. I think it's wonderful that we are actually talking about and thinking about scientific, systematic, standardized assessment. Now, there are many pros and cons, and we don't really have enough time to get into all of that. There are many pros and cons around whether you should or should not have different types of assessments, whether what can be measured, what cannot be measured, etc., etc. But the fact remains that you do need some form of systemic assessment in order to be able to tell how the system is functioning. Now, the NAS provides you with one data point there. But there's also I think, an aspect of, and here I'm going to touch a little bit upon the Joint Secretary's remarks in his keynote. There's an aspect of the new education policy that in everything that he described, I did not see coming through. And that's the whole focus of the policy on competency-based learning and competency-based assessment. So what we've really done is we have actually spent a lot of time and effort in developing digital resources and doing teacher training and worksheets and TV programs and radio, etc., etc. But what I didn't hear was, how are we considering redoing the curriculum so that we can now address the situation that kids are in and try to teach at the right level as as the previous panel was discussing. And I think that's an aspect that perhaps we'd like to unpack a little bit more. But I welcome the focus on assessment. I'm fully aware of the fact that the capacities for assessment in the country are varied. Some areas have very strong capacities, some don't, and we need to work towards building those capacities. But the fact that we're actually talking about assessment and building assessment capacity in the system is, I think, a very welcome thought. So I'm going to stop here. Yamini, over to you.
Yamini, you have looked at the education system from top down, sideways, bottom up. At this current moment, I don't know where you're looking at it from, but from wherever you're looking, what do you see, and what do you see that you didn't expect to see?
Well, I'm really grateful I'm not looking at it through a Zoom room. Amit, you're a very polite person. I'm not. And so I think it's important for us to first acknowledge that the fact that we beat Uganda to keeping our schools closed is a failure, a huge failure of rooms like this, of all of us as a society, that we allowed it to happen under our collective watch. Is something that requires deep reflection and deep thinking because it speaks to, I think, the larger question of how do we, as a society, as governments, as actors in our education system, try and bring together the realities of the school, of the child, and the realities of hard and difficult policy decisions that we have to make, often in rooms like this. But there is a silver lining. The rooms like this arrived at some consensus, even as schools were closed, that there is, at least through the new education policy, a need for us to focus on foundational learning as a front and center element of policy, which itself was a hard battle that was fought over many decades and won. But even as that battle had been fought, or was being fought, the challenge always had been, and as you said, I've looked at the education system top-down side, but particularly from the bottom up, from the classroom, about what that actually meant. Nobody will deny that the expectation, at least in primary schools, for children sitting in classrooms is that they can recognize letters, read a sentence as they progress, go through a paragraph, comprehend it, do basic maths. I still can't, but nonetheless, do basic math, long division by class 5, as my class 5 daughter has reminded me, because I got the division wrong and she got it right. But we know what we're supposed to do. The challenge was why we weren't being able to do it. And there were very different imaginations about that why inside the classroom, from the perspective of the teacher, from the perspective of the parent, from the perspective of the head teacher, the headmistress. All the teachers in this room know this much better than I do. From the perspective of the block education officer, from the perspective of the district education officer, all the way to all of us sitting here. I think because we just closed schools for 2 years, and we didn't have to argue about why it is that there's a learning loss once schools have opened. At least there's now an acknowledgement that there is a learning loss and that we have to focus on some of these very basic skills that students coming into classrooms require. What has also happened, in my view, from looking in a few cases, and just in June, Shailendra, who's here, gave me the opportunity of going to some of the schools in Delhi, Delhi government schools that were running summer camps, that because it was very clear, we've closed schools for a period of time, there is a learning loss, basic skills have to be brought back, children have to be sort of brought to curriculum level. The teachers inside the classrooms running those camps, using outside of classroom syllabus textbook methods to engage with their students. I think that has been an opportunity to at least push deeper a conversation amongst a pedagogical community, the teachers, the children, and parents, about what it is that we need to do to understand what level a child is in when they're walking into the classroom. Because at this point, no one is to blame. We had to shut down schools. There was something unexpected that happened. We all chose to keep the schools closed. Children lost something. Now they've come back, and we need to get them curriculum ready. So everything is neat and clear. And in that process, I think, at least with some of the teachers as we spoke, and we've been spending quite a lot of time with teachers, particularly in schools in Delhi over many years, the clarity that there are different ways in which one can understand what level the child is at and start moving the child through, I think that clarity of purpose has come quite sharply. How will that get integrated into the routine of the syllabus? Now that schools have reopened, I can see it with my primary school going children, immediately we are back. Syllabus khatam karna hai. We have to complete the syllabus now. We have to make up for lost time. And that's the challenge, that how do you bring these skills back in? And here I think, just building on what the Joint Secretary has told us over the last 20 minutes, 25 minutes in his intervention, and what we've learned from what different innovation schools, teachers, government systems, private systems have done in these last 2 years, is that it has forced, and I think ACER and you have mentioned this so often, Rukmini yourself, that it has forced parents, schools, and teachers into a conversation with each other for the first time that is around the reality of the classroom. Now, it's not about whether my child is passing the exam or doing well in school or not paying attention. Everybody knows a little bit more about what is going on in the classroom, and that gives us a lever through which we can have a conversation with parents, with teachers, internally within the system. All the videos of training, etc., that are now available on all these digital platforms, all the worksheets are an opportunity for a dialogue about pedagogy. How do we leverage that, I think, is a challenge we need to think about.
If I be very simplistic, I often think of schools, think of a table, a grid, an Excel table. I think of a school system anywhere, not just in India, as organized by rows. You are in a particular row, which we can call a class, because you're age 8, you're probably in class 3, you're age 10, you're in row for your grade. And then if I just bring some of the experiences from ACER into this, if I create columns, which are learning levels, in ACER we will call them a beginner level, a letter level, a word level, a para level, or a story level. And then you have this grid. So if I go down the class 3 row and stop at the last column, which is being able to read fluently and with understanding a story at standard 2 level, then the last ACER from 2018, which was done in almost 600 districts of the country, the number in that cell, which gives you an idea about how many children in India, at least in rural India, are at grade level in class 3, depending on the state, goes from 25 to 30%. Now, this is a very simple way of doing it. I am not as well versed with NAS, otherwise I would make the same example with NAS. So that's where we are at. And then if we look at our new education policy, 56 pages, we often do quizzes on both Nipun Bharat and NEP in Pratham, just to make sure that everybody knows the nuts and bolts. If I look at page 8, and in fact, for most of us, going beyond page 8 is not even necessary, because there is a box on page 8 which says that if we do not reach this level, foundational literacy and numeracy, which is, let's say, sufficient, I don't know, mastery is the wrong word, whatever is the level below mastery, by the end of standard 2, then the rest of the policy is irrelevant. So one of the requests I have of the government is, let's put that box on every billboard in India, so that सबको समझ में आ जाए कि this is the biggest national priority in education, कि class 3 तक अगर बच्चों को we don't get those basic reading, math, and whatever else is foundation, then the rest of things that we do is not going to happen. Now, as all my panelists have pointed out, between the enabling environment, between the realization within schools, within the pain felt by parents, I think the realization is there that class 3, we are far behind, and of course this goes on higher. Now, as I look at all the things that we are doing within the government, within schools, and I think in fact also within families, I think this push to have a better pedagogy, classroom, support, materials for the younger age group is definitely here. Even a lot of things that Joint Secretary mentioned that was put out for in this lockdown period often focused on the younger age group. And to add to that, the new education policy has added the early childhood part, which I think was a very important and missing part. But I'm concerned about, let's say, if we have 25 million children roughly in every age group in India, and almost everybody is enrolled in school, at least their names are in school. Then we are talking about a large population who is beyond class 3 already. In fact, I was talking to one of our speakers here, and she was saying about how her son or daughter, I don't know, her child, went straight from class 2 to class 5. So triple promotion happened. Now, given my rows and columns picture, where we know that there is a large variation within each row, and the kids who are reaching that last level is limited, and given that we have grades not just up to 3 but up to many more grades, what should we be doing urgently to really bring foundational literacy and numeracy to everyone? I feel that at least for the younger age groups, there's a lot of focus that's happening. I know there's a curriculum framework meeting happening today. I bet in that meeting, the conversation is dominated by how should we do the first steps correctly. But we have kids in 5th, we have kids in 8th, we have kids very close to board exams. What are your views about, what would you recommend should be done urgently for the grades 3 and above?
I don't know whether there's...
Yeah, what more should be done? Let's put
I
it
don't
that
know
way.
if there's
Yeah.
anything that you can do on an urgent basis now, right? Because some of the changes that we really need are changes that will take time, not just because of the process involved in them, but also for people to understand them and translate them into reality. I think very often we forget when we talk about changing the way things are done, that it actually means that it has to go right to the last teacher. And as somebody said, teachers teach the way that they were taught, right? If we were to, for instance, to take what I was talking about earlier, if we were to unpack the curriculum and start looking at it from the perspective of every learner learns at a different pace, and we should allow people to learn as they are comfortable in the way that they can, so that they learn the things that they need to at the right time, you'd have to completely change the curriculum. You'd have to completely change all teaching methodology. You'd have to completely change assessments. And all of this will mean things like changing what's happening in the teaching colleges, what's happening at the school level, what happens in the classroom. So unless we actually think this through, I don't think any of these are urgent. They are urgent, but they're not quickly doable. Let's put it like this. The quickly doable, in my view, has more or less been done. Whatever could have been done is done. But in the long term, I think, and when I say in the long term, I'm talking about the next 5-7 years. That's really as long term as it gets. In the next 5-7 years, if we don't do this unpacking and allow children to learn at their own pace, if we don't allow teaching at the right level, we're going to continue to see more of this.
Yeah, and many ways, I think grade 3 is, I would say, the most critical grade. Because the children in grade 3 they have not been to school the last 2 years. So they've almost landed up in grade 3 without knowing anything at all. And the expectation, and I think it's important because the GEAP report also pointed that out about the curricular restructuring. Because if you then expect the grade 3 teacher or the curriculum to be catching up for grade 1, catching up for grade 2, and also have grade 3 add grade instruction, is too much. Yeah. And that's a serious concern that we are seeing across states. Because states, due to political and various other reasons, they do not want to create a situation where grade 3 children would not be taught grade 3 curriculum. But the point is that that child has not learned anything in the last 2 years, and to expect her to get to a grade 3 curriculum is a humongous task. So the whole idea of really looking at the curriculum and even go back to the grade 3 curriculum and see what are the competencies you initially listed out there, and do you really need to teach all of those, because you probably will never be able to teach those things. So I think that's one thing which requires to be done for all grades, but a grade 3 we find is the most difficult at this stage. That's one thing. The other thing, I guess, is which I I also see, the COVID and all this policy thing of Nippon and all of these coming as, these can also be opportunities if states really take advantage of this. Now, what happens many a time is there's this rush to get things done. And in that rush, what you do, you're just implementing whatever is coming from the top. And that rush, what we find, I mean, with no offense to anybody, but if you go to a teacher in, say, Adhar district of Madhya Pradesh and ask of all these 50 national programs that has been launched, the teacher may not know any of them. So many a times, all our larger reforms just bypass the teacher. The classroom practices never change. And unless those classroom practices change, you are never going to get the large scale change that we're looking at. I mean, you can have the best designed programs from the top, but unless the teacher is convinced, the teacher's mindset changes, the classroom practices changes, it's very difficult to bring about those changes.
I think I agree with everything that's been said, and let me make the problem even more complicated. If you just look at, just reflect back on the last 2 years and school closures, where did you see the most amount of elite parental outrage? And it's important to talk about elites because they tend to occupy the debate. There was most amount of elite parental outrage around the class 10 and class 12 board exams. Was the syllabus going to be cut or not going to be cut? Were the examinations going to be had or not going to be had? And how was the marking going to happen? And that was also what schools were most concerned about. It didn't necessarily push schools to open or anything, but it certainly made headlines. And that speaks to the problem when you get, not necessarily at class 3, but certainly you start seeing it from class 5 onwards, is that we have a very clear, what I call the classroom consensus. It's a consensus that we have forged as a society, that the core purpose of the education system is for all of us to pass the class 10 exam and pass the class 12 exam. 10 definitely, because you won't get a job. 12 hopefully, because then there's some chance of social mobility and possibly a college education. And that essentially means that the prism through which we are looking at how we think about what happens after class 3 is the prism of the examination. This societal consensus is not going to be broken anytime soon. In fact, it's going to be reinforced because you're going to have a large set of children going into class 10 and class 12 now, where the stakes are very high and their futures are dependent on this, having missed out on 2 years of crucial schooling. And we probably are going to introduce some version of a standardized examination in class 5 too, according to the NEP. And therefore, the push and impulse to complete the syllabus and move to rote learning. As a teacher, if I were a teacher, and as a parent, I certainly would encourage my child to just ratta maar ke pass the exam, because that is an important marker. So we might actually end up reinforcing a problem that we all acknowledge is a problem without, after COVID, without really having a good idea of how to solve it. I don't think that it is helpful for us to talk about this, our education system, without recognizing the reality of examinations and passing those examinations, because in a society where unemployment is a huge problem and one that's not going to go away anytime soon, passing those exams will always be the crucial goal. The question is, how do you start making the examination and assessment process one that becomes a little more child-friendly and child-focused? And one of the challenges we've observed when, especially in the higher grades, attempts have been made to try and change how teachers are teaching, is that we don't really have a good enough, we know exactly what a child should learn up till at least class 5. You know that you should be able to read a sentence, comprehend a paragraph, do subtraction, addition, long division. At least that much we have some consensus on. Over and above that, the consensus is on passing the exam. But competencies remain a big question mark. And we haven't yet got around that. And that's going to ask us, for a society with deep inequality as well, it's going to force us to have to ask very hard questions. The competencies that I would expect my child to have coming from an elite South Delhi background versus the competencies that someone who's coming from a slum going into a class 12 in a government school or even a private school may require, may well be different things. So how do you manage that and still ensure social integration? These are very difficult and hard questions. As an assessment system too, in this kind of changed context, is going to have to require a commitment and some new thinking. Do we have the readiness for that? I think in some state governments that conversation has begun. But because we've still got the 19th century problem to solve, there's very little headspace for this reality that we are facing. And in a way, the conversation around new education policy is, I think, causing a bigger problem, because everybody is now focused on that foundational learning thing, which is great. I can't argue with it. But it's just, jab मांग के जब मिलता है जो आपको चाहिए, then you start thinking, what have we lost in that process? So I don't know that we are creating those spaces for these conversations within our debates on curriculum reform, assessments, and teacher training.
So one of the problems of having Yamini on the panel is that she makes a very compelling case for what complex the world is, right? And when she's talking, you feel कि इसमें तो हम फंस गए, अब इससे कैसे हम निकलेंगे without the whole world changing. I also want to provoke my panel, especially Amit, who has been threatening to leave, and I looked at the time, by saying that two things. One is that, I think across many different sectors in India, we seem to not be able to do a very good job as a routine, functioning business. Business as usual seems to have a lot of pitfalls. But when you have a crisis or you have an event, we seem to carry it off very well. Our Kumbh Mela is a very good example. I mean, many of you may have been to Allahabad. Allahabad at normal times is something, but during Kumbh Mela, it's the most efficient place on earth. The people are the same. I mean, it's not like we have suddenly replaced entire population of. So we seem to be able to do good jobs when we do them in some kind of burst, which is maybe why in many government documents we say mission mode, because perhaps that's different from, everyday mode. So we have an experience of doing some things well when it is done urgently and in a time-bound fashion. The other one, since we are in a so-called research evidence-based setting, I want to just point to, and I have to sell my own product, like the district education officer did, but my product is now stamped by the smart buys and whatever the panel is and whatnot. So I feel like it's legitimate to do that. So we run these, what we call learning camps, for kids who are in class 3, 4, and 5 and above. And we see that, and we are doing this not in few places, but let's say across 10,000 villages. Same government schools, same children, where we see that if you actually teach at the right level, which if you go back to my grid, rather than being organized by rows, for a couple of hours a day, you are organized by columns. So we see that children make very fast progress. Government of Karnataka, who runs also a teaching at the right level program called Odu Karnataka, was ready as soon as schools opened to get going with this program. And what they were able to do between when schools opened and they shut for the summer holidays was to get a learning gain in about 2 or 3 months that was higher than their usual annual learning gain. Now, I agree that there is curriculum reform will take time. We need well worked out plans. But isn't this the time for some high profile push campaigns, not with the youngest children, who I also agree need time, need things to come into place, but with older kids who are cognitively ready to make a leap? Comments on this?
No, I think I agree on that. I mean, with the caveat that it's not for the absolutely young students, yeah. and I think that's the crux there, because with the very low early age groups, you want to give them this time, because what you are looking for is sustained literacy and numeracy gains rather than just one-time gain. Definitely for higher grades where children are cognitively much more equipped, you can get into short-paced, fast-paced programs which will help them to catch up quickly. So yeah, fully agree on that. But
I don't think anyone would dispute what you're suggesting, but the concern would be that as Yamini pointed out, ultimately it's all dependent on the assessment, and the nature of the assessment is what's going to wag that dog as well. So I'd be careful about how these programs were designed, the duration for which they'd run, and the outcomes that were expected from them. I think if we were to, because the reason the Kumbh Mela does well is because one of the things we learned from the British is bandobast. We're very good at doing bandobast. So we can do bandobast for short periods of time. But when you do bandobast on a regular basis, then you have things where you know, they fall through the cracks, practices get diluted, and things like that. So I'd have very short duration programs run in the so-called mission mode, as you said, very short duration with very focused outcomes, looking at just maybe the 2 or 3 things that they could possibly achieve. Because ultimately it will go back to what kind of assessment is going to happen at the end of the program or end of the school year that will determine what gets taught in the classroom. I do have to say that, picking up on something that Yamini was saying, if I may blow a trumpet a little bit, one of the states that is actually doing something in this area is Delhi, and I'm pleased to see that Shailen's sitting here, so no doubt we'll hear from him about, you know, what the government is doing. But the new board of education that Delhi has set up is actually looking at how assessments should be conducted and how they can be changed so that they're not the traditional class 10, class 12 board examination that forces kids only to learn by rote.
No, I agree. Yeah, you're going to have to run.
I do apologize, but I know we're running late, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just to add, I think the missions are a really helpful thing, but only missions become a problem because the mission becomes routinized. But the one thing we learned from spending time in Delhi schools when the focus was on sort of some of the mission mode of efforts between 6 to 9, because at 9 it becomes hard because now everyone wants to focus on the class 10 exam. So I actually think that 6 to 8 is a really important period where more can happen. There were many challenges that the teachers faced, but what the missions did is that it continuously reminded and exposed the teacher to the possibilities of change, or to the possibility of the last row, probably not becoming the first row, but at least moving up 4 or 5 rows to become closer to having potential to come to the first row. And that's a very important change for the teacher, because the teacher is always feeling like, I know how to teach, but I'm constrained by a whole set of things to be able to teach in the way that I want to. So when you see progress, I think it serves as motivation. And what it also did, despite all the hard problems that the teachers, the students, the whole process was confronting, was that it changed the tone of the conversation in the staff room. So even when in the staff room there's a lot of discussion about good child versus not a good learner, or the child that is going to fail, or the stress of the exam and the syllabus completion, the conversation was around what were you teaching and how were you teaching to make that determination. And I think those shifts are really going to be where the change happens. So I think not one mission, but continuous and lots of missions to keep exposing teachers to the possibilities of change in the 6 to 8 will make a big difference.
Before I lose any more panelists and they jump off the stage and go away, I wanted to do just one last round, maybe not unconnected, but specific to the fact that one of the reasons we are all here is that we are responding or discussing in the context of some research that was done, that we are at this time in a particular, I think, moment in history. And the next, I mean, it's always the case that the next couple of years are really important, but in this case, you know, we are hopefully getting back to normal. We have certain national goals to meet. There are international goals that we are looking at. If you had to recommend to whoever is listening in the audience about what kind of research could really help us in thinking through the next couple of years, what would your favorite projects be?
I mean, what we have been kind of really promoting with states is to do a proper diagnostic of classroom practices in the early grades. Because that sometimes we find, in spite of all the, again, in spite of all the policies talking the right things, what we need to see, and we often see that, in the classroom the teacher has not changed. So there's no dialogue happening with the child. So unless you have a dialogue happening with the child, unless the teacher-student relationships are built, what are you going to base your curriculum on? How are you going to teach even alphabets unless you have the basic conversational dialogue going on? The respect for language, the respect for children's classroom language. Now, some of these things are very deep-rooted, which impacts why children are not developing early literacy and numeracy skills. And what we have been asking states to do is at least do a diagnostics to see what are the current classroom practices are, what are the levers that we need to change in order to bring the larger change.
Because that'll change the answer. So seriously, I think I completely agree on the classroom practices, but I would add that in order to facilitate classroom practices, you also need to have an enabling system and an enabling environment. I think we don't know enough about what are the conditions under which you can create a because an administrative architecture is never going to disappear unless you want the government to disappear, which is not going to happen. So what are the ways in which you can create a administrative architecture that sustains, enables, and empowers the teacher and the classroom? We know a lot from a lot of the economics literature about new public management, about how you change the terms of the contract, incentivize, so ranking, assessments, performance. These are all parts and parcels of now our lexicon on what it'll change to make the system more accountable for outcomes. But I actually think it misses a lot about the reality of the people who are part of that system. So how can we develop deep embedded research that gives us a better understanding of the people? Because again, the people are never going to change. It's how they respond to the structures, the culture, the organization within which they have to facilitate and enable the classroom and the teacher is something that's very important. And I think we need more understanding of that, linked to which there's a lot of talk about leadership, school leadership, bureaucratic leadership, administrative leadership, political leadership. We always look for these, knight in shining armor, change maker who will come and everything will get better. But that champion has to be embedded in a system. So what are the conditions in a system that can actually ensure that the champion leaves something behind and doesn't champion away for a little bit, but then runs off to champion on a different cause? And again, I think that's part and parcel of systems research, which we need to focus on. So Rachel was talking a little bit about what works. I think in that what works, the technical or technocratic tools are useful and important and critical, but within that, what works about a system is what we need to understand more, and research can help there.
So since, we are the fourth pillar, talking to the other three pillars who are here, the government is here, the donors are here, and I'm assuming there are a lot of researchers in the audience. I want to put two of my favorite wish lists on our list as well. One is, I think that India, given that we have 300 million children in school, we have very few longitudinal studies. We have Young Lives, which is absolutely unique, but was done in India only in Andhra Pradesh. And then we've had some longitudinal studies which have been short run. But I really feel that this is an opportunity for everybody to put their resources together to look at the cohort who's in first standard this year. And where do they reach by 2025? Where do they reach by 2027? And if we want to go international, then where do they reach by 2030, I think? That's when the SDG goals. Because if there is an effort to track and learn deeply from the experiences, the classroom experiences, the child's own journey, as well as looking at what is happening in the family, I think a lot could be learned. And this is something that if there is a joint effort, a lot of people could benefit from that. A second one, I think, is coming from a conference that some of us attended a couple of, I think last week it was, about this RISE conference, which is doing a huge amount of research in several countries, and India is one of them. And the big argument that happened was on a relatively unresearched area. And again, I'm going back to what Joint Secretary said, that parental involvement, we all are involved as parents, and some as grandparents, in our children's education. Last 2 years, I think across the board, people have had a good taste of not just schooling, but learning. But what kind of parental participation is going to help our children go forward, I think, is a vastly unresearched area. We have a lot of money we spend on teacher training, but hardly anything on parent training. And really, if we feel that these are two important pillars, then I would say that understanding this parental engagement. In Pratham, we have almost decided that the success of Nipun Bharat is going to depend on the parents' understanding of how children should be treated in the classroom, should be dealt with at home, and unless there is a widespread societal understanding of the Nipun Bharat goals, it is unlikely that we will be able to, reach them. So I would like to make a plug for parental. Yamini is holding her mic very close. As perhaps the youngest person on the panel, we should let her have the last word. Okay.
No, I just remembered you. I should have remembered this as the first point, but we discussed this at that meeting as well. Mothers, that we are now, children entering the school system today are probably the first time in the history of mass education in India going to be children of mothers who have at least spent 3 to 5 years inside a classroom, possibly learning a little bit of something. And what impact that is going to have on how mothers engage with their children, because let's be honest, ultimately, it's on our head more than the fathers, and what that does to the dynamics of the parent-teacher and parent-school relationship is something that I think we should understand better, because it would leverage exactly what you're saying in a more powerful way.
So I don't want to keep you from your lunch. I hope we as the panel before lunch have done our job. Please clap for us. And thank you so much for having us here and listening to us.